All right, the Pelicans are back to winning ways after a much-needed victory over the Houston Rockets. And after a win like this, can they actually trade Jonas Valanciunas? Let's break it down in a live episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on a Thursday, day after the Pelicans beat, well, we're doing the show live, actually, right after the game, after the Pelicans beat the Houston Rockets 110-99, a little bit nerve-wracking towards the end, but they got the victory, thanks in part to Jonas Valanciunas without Zion Williamson in this game. Real important one. Get off the losing streak, get a needed win against a division team, have a chance to build some momentum before coming back home with a Friday game against the San Antonio Spurs. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast, breaking down everything you want to know about this team, whether it's trade targets, Mikal Bridges we looked at yesterday, other targets, whether it's going to be the X's and O's and Valanciunas, which we're going to look at today. I want to get into some of the issues with the officiating because, it's been kind of weird this year. This is the question I want to pose to the chat here. Do you have a problem with the NBA officiating this season, seasons past? Because it's getting worse, it feels like. Let me know what you think in the comments here. Become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday. Never miss an episode. We're going to have a lot to talk about over the next couple of days as we gear up for the NBA's trade deadline. That's here now, since this is the Thursday show, exactly a week away. Are the Pelicans going to make a move? So no Zion Williamson in this game. Ruled out with a left foot contusion, the thing that's been bothering him a little bit. He did go through warmups and shoot around today, and that was a little surprising to see him ruled out. I think it's also a little bit of like load management here with everything. But look, the Pelicans got the win a little bit closer than maybe you would have liked to have seen, but getting on the road and getting a victory over a Houston team that's been somewhat competitive, I think, is still a good win, and those are the important things to really look at with all of this. And what you saw in this game from New Orleans was, at one point, a good first half, right? Brandon Ingram was getting to his spots with no Zion there. You can let him kind of cook a little bit more, put the ball in his hands, and was hitting some of his mid-rangers. He was also aggressive, I thought, in the first half of this game, really trying to get to the rim and score in a way that he normally doesn't, right? He took 8 shots at the rim in the restricted area, between 6 and 8. It's tough to see right now. I don't have all the data in front of me. That's a really good performance from BI, being aggressive, opening things up, and you saw that leading to open three-pointers for his teammates. And then towards the end of the first half, turnovers really crept up and became a problem for New Orleans as they started to revert to a little bit more isolation basketball, not as much off-ball movement. So you had a choice to make if you're head coach Willie Green. What do you do in the third quarter here? Do you kind of stick with what you've been doing? Got you a lead in the first half, right? The Pelicans led by as many in this one as 20 points, right? That was mostly in the second half. Or do you mix it up? And normally what they've been doing to start the third quarter is starting Larry Nance Jr. in place of Jonas Valanciunas, but they did not do that in this game, and that was very much the correct move. Jonas Valanciunas finished with 25 points, 14 rebounds here, 2 assists. He was 5 of 9 from the free throw line, getting there a bunch, 10 of 15. He was very good in this game. He also had a block. He was matched up against Alperen Sengun, the center for the Houston Rockets, who's kind of like a riser in the NBA. This is like a guy who's an up-and-coming potential star, right? And Sengun lost this matchup pretty heavily. 10 points, 10 rebounds, 5 assists, but 4 of 11 shooting. Jonas Valanciunas just kind of did work on him down low, and that was pretty impressive. So for Willie Green to realize kind of who the hot hand was, go away from what he's been doing, what they want to do, I think says something about the coaching a little bit here, right? That is some growth. That's some improvement from head coach Willie Green, who at times has not exactly been there, right? So I think playing through Jonas Valanciunas, particularly in that third quarter and the fourth quarter, was exactly the right move here. And well, there you go. And this leads to the bigger question, right? They lose this game pretty heavily, I think. Easily, let's say, not heavily, maybe not by a lot, but they lose this game without Jonas Valanciunas. And as we approach the trade deadline, we were just talking about it in the beginning of the show, a week away here, the move that we expect, if they make a move at all, is moving Jonas Valanciunas for another center. There's questions about some of the fit, and I agree with that. Do they use him properly? No, they don't get him the ball and kind of run their offense through him nearly as much as they should. I think at times you see some top teams kind of target him. He's a liability then. I don't know if you can win with him as your starting center in the postseason, but you've got to get there in the first place, right? And Jonas Valanciunas is absolutely going to help you get there. And being the Iron Man that he is too, I think that's sometimes an important thing to keep in mind, right? We don't need to jump ahead to a conference finals that they're hypothetically going to make, where they might not even get there if they don't have this guy. So you don't need to worry about him killing you there, because you need to get there in the first place, and he's the type of guy that would get you there. And I think that is something that the Pelicans are struggling with a little bit here. But if Jarrett Allen's not on the table, and there's no reason to think that he is on the table right now with how well the Cleveland Cavaliers are playing, any trade for Jonas Valanciunas is going to be a downgrade at this position. A significant downgrade at this position too. You saw the Houston Rockets kind of trying to scheme him out, right? They threw the ball to him down low and it drew a double team, which meant someone's going to be open. And so that's what you want to see, I think, more of at times, especially if a guy like Zion Williamson is out. And the Pelicans need to lean into that. The issue with Jonas Valanciunas, again, has never been his player that he's not a good player, right? As I've always said, the Pelicans kind of look at this and go, it's not you, Jonas, it's us. He's out of contract after this year. I don't know what his market is. I wouldn't be terrified of him potentially leaving in free agency. I think you could re-sign him for around the same amount of money, if not potentially less, depending on what the market is. But if they think they can bring him back or get him on a new contract, I think you absolutely should not trade away Jonas Valanciunas. And this leads me to saying and believing, as I've been kind of saying regularly to y'all here who are everydayers, that I don't think they need to make a move at the trade deadline. I think I'd prefer them not to make a move that downgrades the team just to get a little bit more long-term security at the center position. And I'd rather them, potentially risk losing him, but just figure out what you are this season. This team is not bad. I know a lot of people were saying sky is falling, all of that after some of these losses, but there's still a good team here that has a lot of room to improve. And I'd like to see them try and reach that. Whether they can reach that potential remains to be seen. I have doubts about that potentially, but they definitely could. And Jonas Valanciunas makes you a better team, a more complete team, let alone the fact that he doesn't miss games. So credit to Willie Green for playing through Jonas Valanciunas in the second half of this one and going and getting this victory that was, in my opinion, much needed over the Houston Rockets. Literally just any team. Just get the win here, and that was the important thing they did. And Jonas Valanciunas is the big reason why. Did Jonas Valanciunas have a good game account? I saw tweeted expletive yes, and that is emphatically the way to describe what he did. So coming up next, let's look at some of the other performances from this one. I liked what we saw from Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy with a massive shot, Dyson Daniels doing some work too. Najee Marshall, you saw some really great things here. Let's break that down coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS because it's just you versus the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more or less on the stat projection for 2 to 6 players and watch the winnings roll in. And look, We've got the big game coming up, and you can go for a combo projection here. You can take CJ McCollum and Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made and receptions. So testing your skills on Prize Picks this basketball season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. And Prize Picks is really simple to play. You can make your picks and submit your entry in less than 60 seconds. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA, a lowercase, for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that is prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100 when you use promo code LockedOn. Prize Picks, it's daily fantasy sports made easy. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, breaking down everything you want to know about this team, whether it's trade talks, trade rumors, whether it's the X's and O's, what we're seeing on the court, looking at Willie Green's rotations, all of those. Friday, which is, I guess, technically tomorrow, we're going to have a lot of fun. I'm going to grade your trades. Final Friday show before the trade deadline. I've got hundreds from people on Twitter at this point, at Nola Jake. Send me your trades. I'm going to read them on the show. We're going to grade them. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they realistic? Are they not realistic? We're going to look at it all. So if you want your trade to potentially be seen on here, if you've got a crazy idea, send it over to me on Twitter. We're going to grade them in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Now for your second listen today, go check out Locked On Sports Today. It's the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Let's continue talking about the Pelicans' win over the Houston Rockets, 110-99. Look, there really weren't any bad performances from anybody in this game. Dyson Daniels getting the start in place of Herb Jones, who didn't play in this one. You had Trey Murphy get in there, playing and getting the start in place of Zion Williamson. Both played relatively well. You saw Dyson Daniels come out and look for offense in a way that we haven't really seen him do. 9 points might not seem like much, and it's not. But when he didn't take a shot attempt the other night, that's a significant improvement there, right? 9 points, 3 assists, 2 rebounds, played great defense on Fred VanVleet, right? That was the guy you were really worried could just pop off against the New Orleans Pelicans. They limited him to 16 points. I'll take that kind of any day of the week. Did a good enough job on Jalen Green, who's been playing some of his best basketball. Losing, the team was losing Fred VanVleet and Jalen Green from 3 at times. But when you were playing through Jonas Valanciunas, it seemed to work, right? And you were giving up shots to Jabari Smith Jr., which I think you can kind of live with on some of these. Aaron Holiday taking 4 threes are the shots that you want to be giving up. And the Pelicans' defensive game plan worked. One of the things to keep in mind is this defense has been good all season long, no matter who's playing. I saw in the comments here people saying Zion's not a good defender, or BI's not a good defender. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Jonas isn't a good defender, or CJ's getting picked on. This team has been very good defensively, no matter who's out on the court. It doesn't matter necessarily about the individual, but as their collective as a unit, and that's something that this team is really succeeding with. So seeing them, again, come out and play well with 2 new starters in there. Trey hasn't been particularly great defensively, but this team was doing a good job playing defense. And I think, again, that's why I keep saying that, you want to lean more into offense, because no matter what, you've been good defensively here. Holding a team under 100 points, I don't have the advanced stats yet to see what the defensive rating for the team was, or if anyone knows, put it in the chat. Under 100 points here is really good in today's NBA. We've been talking about how basically the top offenses in the league are existing all at the same time right now in this one. And so to hold a team under 100, good job. And they're doing that, with a variety of guys that you don't consider good defenders, but the team as a whole is defending really well. Helps when you get solid contributions from guys like Najee Marshall, right? Larry Nance Jr. has done a very good job in limited minutes in this one, and throughout the entire season since he's been back healthy. So I think when you have a good defense, you've got to lean into more offense. And you finally kind of saw them do that, I thought, with Jonas Valanciunas in this game. And it let BI kind of cook in the beginning, and they kind of all deferred to one another and knew exactly what they needed to be doing. And that I thought was impressive. So really good performances from Dyson Daniels on the defensive side of the ball. You had Trey Murphy as well, right? Hitting that big shot. One of the things I love about Trey is he has not been shooting well, right? Like not been shooting well at all. And, you know, when you look at things here, someone just texted me something and I'm trying to figure, that was actually really good. Gus Cattengill of ESPN Radio and the Pelicans Radio Network tweeting me things or texting me things, which is funny live in the moment. Thanks, Gus, for messing up my show. Trey Murphy hitting the big shot. The thing that I loved the most about him was, look, that's a clutch shot to hit, right? You have had a rough stretch, and he did not even mind going out and taking that three. One, I love that Willie Green subbed him in. That's an offensive substitution late in a game when you needed to get a bucket. Needed to get a bucket on that possession, right? With about 3 minutes left to go. So subbing Trey in, who's been on a cold streak and hasn't been a good defender, that's a lot of trust Willie Green was putting in him. And I love Trey's confidence of, look, I know my shot feels good. It's going to go in eventually, and not let that get to his head and have the mental aspect of that correct, I thought was massive. That's the type of shot that I think builds a ton of confidence back in you. And that's something that I think could open the door for Trey Murphy to come back and be himself. That was a massive shot. And given the situation, given how head coach Willie Green normally coaches things, it was all a real big deal here. It's all a real big deal here. So I loved what we saw from Trey in that one. Not an amazing game. You know, he's 5 of 12, 3 of 10 from 3, 6 rebounds, 1 assist, 13 points. The numbers don't pop out at you. But y'all, that 3 he hit was so big, and all of the things that go into that, I think, is an incredibly impressive thing. So I was very happy to see all of that. Look, CJ was great in this game too. Just like a cool, calm, easy 19 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists. Right? Going out, hitting 3 of 7 from deep, 42.9%, just kind of perfect game. You know, he's been good. I've seen a lot of people say we need to trade him, we need to bring him off the bench. No, you need that shooting in the lineup, right? And I think one of the things that he can do is he can kind of run your offense at times. You don't want him doing that all the time, but you saw a couple lineups that worked where he was one of the 2 anchors. You know, in the second quarter when they were running Trey Murphy, CJ McCollum, Jordan Hawkins, Najee Marshall, and then Jonas Valanciunas, basically kind of playing through Jonas, letting CJ work off ball like that as your secondary creator, was really great offense, right? There were shooters, the court was spaced, things looked beautiful. It's shocking what happens when you put 3 shooters on this court and how much easier the game becomes. The ball movement works really well. All of that, I thought, really worked in this game, and I was pretty pleased to see them run some of those lineups. I want to see some of those lineups here, you know, where some of those lineups around Zion Williamson, more shooters around him would be good. I would like to see also some more shooters around Brain Ingram and see if he has more space rather than taking mid-rangers, but to go put pressure on the rim, because he is doing that at a very good rate this season. We probably need to spend a whole episode looking at that sort of thing. So I think that, you know, again, there's potential for this team to be good, and they're still trying to figure things out. I'd like him to figure it out sooner. You know, this was probably a tighter win than you would have liked to have seen. But overall, you got to get these kind of victories, and I'm very pleased that they did. BI, by the way, at the rim this season is shooting 75 in the restricted area, shooting 75.3%. We want to see more of that. We want to see that number. You know, he's taking 13% of his shots there, get to like 20% if we could. You know, his first year in New Orleans, he took almost 25% of his shots at the rim. When Zion's not out there on the court and you have BI ideally with a point guard and some shooting, let him attack the rim, get there. He can put up some really good numbers, put pressure on the defense. He's doing really well with that. I want to see more of that here. So coming up next, let's talk about the referee. And I thought, look, that was a loaded question, right, that I asked in the beginning here. Y'all hate the refs. I hate the refs. Let's talk about it. Coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Right now, though, I'm excited to tell you about FanDuel. I mean, it's Super Bowl week, right? So happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And if you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about the best seats on the couch, grabbing your favorite snacks, and placing some super bets. Sorry, not this week, next week. Bumbuck is Sunday of all days, so that's always a fun day when that happens. So FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3 when you're putting all those bets down. So not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points are going to be scored, so many more. Heads or tails on the coin toss is always a great one as well. So new customers, if you join today, you're going to get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and the official sportsbook of Locked On. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, breaking down everything you want to know about this team, whether it's trade rumors, trade talk, what makes sense, what doesn't, what's the ceiling for this team. Great guests like Will Guillory of The Athletic. We'll get some more on and everything too. Covered all here. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Become an everydayer. I saw ABJ504 in here saying comment as he does every day. Comment every day. Listen every day. That supports the channel. Helps keep this free in 5 days a week for y'all. Since we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Tell a friend about the show too. Like, get a friend to subscribe. Get a friend to start listening to Locked On Pelicans if they don't already. You really want to help? Let me know if you're getting friends to listen. Send them to the link. Send them the trade rumors, whatever episode it is that you've liked. Send them that show. Make sure they start listening and become an everydayer as well. So let's get into the refs here, and then we'll do a little bit of trade talk as we start to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Yeah, refereeing, officiating in the NBA is bad. You know, you hear me do the sponsors on the show here, right? We just did FanDuel. Go check them out. $200 in bonus bets when your first bet of $5 or more wins. We talked about Prize Picks if you're looking for daily fantasy sports. There's been others, right? eBay Motors, all of those. You know, we send like a sizzle reel around to like if an advertiser's interested on there. And we sent one out last year. And they kind of take clips of shows that they think are good and they put them in to this like reel that's like, advertise. This is kind of what you're advertising on and all of those things. And one of my favorite things, having seen this, is there's a clip of me in there and it's me just going, the NBA has an officiating problem, in like a deeper than normal voice and all of that, right? Trying to do my best like movie voice or something along those lines. I thought this for a while. The NBA has an officiating problem, one, because it's just inconsistent. And you saw it in this game, right? You saw how inconsistent it was in this game, that the first half was officiated very differently than the second half. And big men are officiated differently than guards, even though the same rules apply to everybody, right? You can make light contact on a guard and they're going to go to the free throw line. You make that same kind of contact on a big man and there's nothing, right? It's why Zion doesn't get a ton of foul calls. He's almost being penalized for being bigger and stronger than everyone that he's going against, even though there's contact there, right? They really need to figure out what to do about this, right? Like Dylan Brooks is a horrible offender on this. He was terrible in this one, right? What the wild thing was, you saw the Houston Rockets head coach Ime Udoka challenge a call that was a foul against Jonas Valanciunas that sent him to the line. And like, what was he seeing in that? What did he think he was going to get overturned? It's mildly concerning to me that a head coach would challenge that when there were like 4 fouls on Jonas during that, thinking that that might get overturned, thinking that, hey, no, that's not a foul. If he thinks that, there's a reason he thinks that, probably because of how refs have called the game. You know, one of the things that you don't look, everyone's game planning enough and trying to figure out how to get an advantage here. You don't need to do scouting reports, right, on referees. You do that on other things. You do that on Carlito's Way. Refs got a FanDuel account. Okay, I like that one. That one was good here. I like that. It's America's #1 sports book, so they probably do if they do it all. So, you know, when you have the inconsistencies there, you know, you scout the opponent. You scout their players, you know, you scout the draft and all those things. You don't need to be scouting refs. Who here can name multiple NBA refs? Who here in the chat can name multiple NBA refs? If you're just listening and you're listening to this later, think about it for a second. How many refs can you name? You know their faces. I know too many. A lot of them have like Wikipedia pages too, right? Like, why do some of these guys need a Wikipedia page? Why are we tracking some of the stats where Chris Paul is 0-7 against certain referees and things like that? Or what was 0 for 26 or whatever it was? This shouldn't be storylines in the NBA, and I think it detracts from the overall product. If all refs were calling things exactly the same, that would be one thing. But the fact that different refs call games very differently and at times seem to just like the spotlight, I think is a big problem for me here. So all of this is like horrible, right? Like, I see someone's naming Scott Foster. That's going to be one of the more like famous ones here. So there's just too much of this in the NBA, and it's really starting to detract, right? Like, I like the idea of the NBA's last 2-minute report, and this is a reason why I'm bringing this up is, the NBA puts out the last 2-minute report of games that qualify. So it's basically close games in the last 2 minutes, and we look at the calls. Were they correct? Were they incorrect? Who benefited from wrong calls? And it's a way of transparency, right? The problem is, like, what good does that do you when there are incorrect calls that go against a team? And that, I think, is a problem, right? If we're not fixing these mistakes, what good does the transparency do? Or is the NBA just kind of okay with all of this? And I think that's like a real big problem. There seems to be no punishment for any of these blown calls. And the Pelicans this season, someone did the numbers on it of like the net positive, negative of like missed calls. The Pelicans are number one, and not in a good way on this, basically getting screwed by the referees in the NBA's last 2-minute report. That's a horrible thing, right? We shouldn't be talking about that. We shouldn't be thinking about that. But there's definitely games where you're like, the refs influence that final result and it makes no sense. And there's nothing that you can do about it after the fact, right? Portland was going to try and potentially, on a horrible, not when they didn't give them a timeout the other day, was going to appeal the loss. Now they decided not to because I think they want to lose. But it's been a big problem, I think, throughout the league. So they need to do something about that. And you saw it get kind of weird in this game. And if the Pelicans had lost, we would have been talking about how the refs weren't the reason they lost, probably. But the fact is, it really influenced the game in a way that it shouldn't. And that's something that needs to get fixed, because for me, that really kind of like takes it away here. Daniel Garrett says Tony Brothers. Oh boy, Tony Brothers is one, isn't he? So they need to figure something out with the referees to hold them more accountable here, because we've seen calls go against the Pelicans in the final 2 minutes of close games more so than any other team. They're 0-6 in games decided by 3 points or less. That might have a factor into it with everything. So never really understood it, and hopefully that starts to change for the Pelicans here. So we'll have more in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans on the trade deadline. We're going to grade your trades. So send me your trades on Twitter. I'm going to give them a letter grade. They're going to get 2. Good trade, bad trade, kind of a grade on that, and then how realistic is said trade. We'll have some fun. You're going to trade for LeBron James? Someone tweeted at me earlier today about, like, just before I went live, trading for Jimmy Butler. All of those things, are those realistic? They're not, but we'll look at them. It's kind of fun to see what's out there and what we think could happen and go into some of the decision making here with everything. Final thing I'll say here, Brandon Penton, Jake, where can we find data on opponent stats where Dyson is the primary defender? Trying to analyze Dyson's choice over Hawkins without being too much of a fan guy here. That is a great question. And you can, I'll say this as we wrap up the show. I go to a couple places for stats. One is NBA.com/stats. There's tracking data that can show you some of the individual matchups. You can look at it in the box score as well of games. If you go to the box score, it's usually available the next day. It's got to get compiled. It's under where you click on like traditional and you see all the other things. It can show you, and I believe it's like matchup data or something like that. Pelicans, by the way, now that the data is out, 103.1 defensive rating. That's very, very good. Defense was good in this game. I also go to basketball-reference for stats, and then one of my favorite sites that you need to pay for, that you need a yearly subscription to, that I gladly pay for, it's like $50, is cleaningtheglass.com. They have all of those things. That's where I get all of my stats and all of those things. Send me your trade ideas at Nola Jake on Twitter X. I don't call it X. I just call it Twitter. That's what it is. We'll grade your trades. It might not get picked, but we'll try and get a bunch of them in there too. And yeah, that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. Good win by the Pelicans. Much needed win by the Pelicans here. So I was happy to see Jonas Valanciunas. Hopefully, in my opinion, doesn't get traded by the trade deadline. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at Nola Jake on Twitter. This has been the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I'll see you all tomorrow with the